Have you ever noticed how some people they can express themselves so clearly and it's like you feel exactly what they're feeling?
Yeah.
Almost like a superpower, making their words come alive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what we're going to be doing today.
Okay.
We're going to unlock that superpower together.
Sounds good.
We're going to explore how we can use the building blocks of language to communicate our emotions more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah,
It's like we all have these incredible tools, but sometimes we don't know how to use them to their full potential.
exactly. And we're going to start with the most basic tool, the foundation of it all, the sentence.
It's fascinating how something so simple can have such a profound impact on how we connect with others.
For sure. Okay, so we all know what a sentence is, right?
Right.
But do we really understand just how powerful it can be?
I think a lot of people take sentences for granted. You know,
Uh-huh.
they see them as just a way to convey information.
Right.
But the truth is, sentences are the key to unlocking a whole world of emotions.
So how do we make our sentences work harder for us?
Well, a good place to start is understanding the core structure of a sentence.
Okay.
You might remember this from school: the subject, the verb, and the object.
Right. Like the cat sat on the mat.
Exactly.
So the cat is the subject, sat is the verb, and the mat is the object.
Yep,
Seems pretty basic.
it is.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. But even with this simple structure, we can create sentences that evoke strong emotions.
Okay.
For example, instead of saying, the cat sat on the mat,
Right.
we could say, the lonely cat curled up on the worn mat.
Wow. Yeah, suddenly I have this image of a sad little cat all alone. Just by changing a few words, the whole feeling of the sentence changes.
Exactly. That's the power of word choice.
Hmm.
And it's not just about the adjectives.
Okay.
The verbs we choose can also make a big difference.
Right.
Instead of sat,
Yeah.
we use curled up,
Yeah.
which gives us a sense of vulnerability and sadness.
I see. So even with this basic sentence structure, we can start to paint a picture with our words and evoke emotions in our listener.
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing.
And it's just the beginning. Once we understand these fundamentals, we can start to experiment with more complex sentence structures and really unleash the power of language.
Okay, I'm already feeling inspired. But before we jump ahead, let's break down this subject-verb-object thing a little further.
Good idea.
Understanding the roles of these three elements is crucial to building strong, impactful sentences.
It is.
Okay, so the subject, that's the who or what that's doing the action right.
Exactly. It's the star of the sentence.
And the verb, that's the action itself,
Right.
what the subject is doing.
Right.
And the object is the thing that receives the action.
That's right.
It's what the verb is acting upon.
Yeah.
So in our sad cat example, the worn mat is the object because it's where the cat is curling up.
Precisely. And you'll find that in many sentences expressing emotions, the object is often something concrete. That helps to ground the feeling in a tangible image. It gives the listener something to latch onto.
This is making a lot of sense. So by carefully choosing our subjects, verbs, and objects, we can start to build sentences that not only convey information, but also evoke specific emotions.
That's right.
It's like we're sculpting with language.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like a sculptor has different tools for shaping their creation,
Right.
we have different types of sentences at our disposal.
Ooh, you're talking about things like simple sentences and compound sentences and all that.
Exactly. And understanding the nuances of these different sentence types can help us to fine-tune our emotional expression even further.
It's getting really interesting.
I
I'm starting to see how much depth there is to something as seemingly simple as a sentence. It's like a whole world is opening up.
It really is. And the more we explore the possibilities of language, the more effectively we can communicate our inner world to others.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. We know our subjects, our verbs, and our objects. We even know that there are different types of sentences out there waiting to be explored.
Yes.
What's next? How do we actually start using this knowledge to express our emotions?
That's a great question. And the best way to learn is by example.
Okay.
Let's take a look at a few different emotions and see how we can express them using the tools we've discussed.
I'm ready. Let's dive into the world of emotions and see what kind of sentences we can create.
Let's start with a feeling we all experience: happiness.
Okay, happiness. That's a good one.
Yeah.
It seems pretty straightforward. But how can we really capture that feeling in a sentence?
Let's try an example. How about her heart soared as she watched the children play?
Oh, I like that. I can practically feel the joy in that sentence. It's not just stating a fact. It's really painting a picture of the emotion.
Exactly. We're not just saying she's happy. We're showing the listener how her happiness manifests physically. Her heart soaring creates a vivid image of pure joy.
I see. So it's about going beyond the literal and using language that creates a sensory experience for the listener.
Absolutely. And notice how the verb soared adds to the emotional impact. It's a much stronger choice than, say, felt.
That's true. Sword really conveys a sense of lightness and freedom, which aligns perfectly with the feeling of happiness.
Now let's see how we can shift the emotional tone by changing the sentence structure. We could say something like, watching the children play filled her with a sense of pure joy.
Okay, that's interesting. It still conveys happiness, but it feels a bit more grounded, a bit more reflective.
You're right. By using a phrase like filled her with, we're emphasizing the internal experience of the emotion. It's less about outward expression and more about the depth of feeling.
So even though both sentences express happiness, the way we structure them can subtly change the nuance of the emotion.
Precisely. And that's where the art of communication really comes into play. It's about understanding the tools at your disposal and using them intentionally to craft the exact message you want to convey.
This is fascinating. I'm starting to realize that there are so many layers to language, so many ways to fine-tune our expression.
Exactly. Now let's move on to a slightly more complex emotion, anxiety. How would you try to express that in a sentence?
Okay, anxiety. How about his thoughts raced as he waited for the news?
That's a great start. You're using action to convey the internal turmoil of anxiety? The verb raced immediately puts us in a state of unease.
Right, I wanted to create that feeling of being overwhelmed, like your mind can't slow down.
You did that perfectly. And notice how the simple sentence structure adds to the feeling of urgency and tension.
That's interesting. So shorter sentences can actually be more impactful when conveying certain emotions.
Absolutely. Sometimes brevity can be more powerful than elaborate descriptions. It allows the emotion to speak for itself without any unnecessary clutter.
So if I wanted to emphasize the overwhelming nature of his anxiety even further, I could make the sentence even shorter, like, his thoughts raced.
Exactly. That packs a punch. It leaves the listener hanging, creating a sense of suspense and unease.
Wow, I'm really seeing how even the smallest choices can have a huge impact on the emotional weight of a sentence.
Now let's experiment with adding a bit more complexity. We could say, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach as he waited for the news.
Ooh, that's good. It's still a relatively short sentence, but the imagery is so strong, I can feel the tension in my own stomach just hearing it.
Exactly. By using a metaphor like a knot of anxiety, we're giving a physical manifestation to the emotion. It allows the listener to connect with the feeling on a visceral level.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how metaphors and similes can add so much depth and richness to our emotional expression.
They're powerful tools, and the more you practice using them, the more naturally they'll come to you now. Before I move on to another emotion, I want to introduce another concept that can help us fine-tune our expression: active versus passive voice.
Ooh, I remember learning about that in school, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you refresh my memory?
Of course, in a nutshell, active voice is when the subject of the sentence performs the action. Passive voice is when the subject is acted upon.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, an active sentence would be, she wrote the letter. A passive sentence would be, the letter was written by her.
Okay, I see the difference, but how does that relate to expressing emotions?
Well, active voice generally creates a sense of directness and agency. It emphasizes the subject's role in the action, which can be powerful when expressing strong emotions. Passive voice, on the other hand, can create a sense of distance or detachment. It can be useful when you want to emphasize the action itself rather than the person performing it.
So if I wanted to express anger, for example,
Yeah,
I might choose active voice to emphasize the intensity of the emotion.
exactly. You could say something like, he slammed his fist on the table in frustration. The active voice highlights the physical action, conveying the raw emotion.
That makes sense. And if I wanted to express sadness in a more subdued way, I might use passive voice.
Precisely, you could say she was overcome with grief. The passive voice creates a sense of helplessness and emphasizes the overwhelming nature of the emotion.
This is so helpful. I'm starting to see how all of these tools work together to create a nuanced and impactful emotional landscape.
And that's the beauty of language. It's like an orchestra with all these different instruments working in harmony to create something truly beautiful.
I love that analogy. It's making me want to experiment with all these different tools and see what kind of emotional symphony I can create.
That's the spirit. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become in expressing yourself authentically and powerfully.
Okay, so we've covered happiness, anxiety, and even touched on anger and sadness. But there's a whole world of emotions out there. I'm eager to explore more.
Me too. Let's delve into another emotion that can be particularly tricky to express: nostalgia.
Ooh, nostalgia. That feeling of longing for the past, that bittersweet mix of happiness and sadness. How can we capture that complexity in a sentence?
Let's see, how about this? The scent of freshly baked bread transported her back to her childhood kitchen.
Wow, that's beautiful. I can practically smell the bread and feel the warmth of that memory.
Exactly. We're using sensory details to evoke the feeling of nostalgia. The smell of bread acts as a trigger, transporting the subject back to a specific time and place.
And the verb transported is so evocative. It really captures that feeling of being swept away by a memory.
You're right. And notice how the sentence structure itself mirrors the experience of nostalgia. It starts in the present, then jumps back to the past, just like our minds do when we're reminiscing.
That's so clever. I never realized how much thought goes into crafting a sentence that truly captures an emotion.
It's a subtle art, but with practice you can master it. Now let's try a slightly different approach. How about a wave of nostalgia washed over her as she listened to the old song?
Oh, I like that it's more abstract, but it still conveys that feeling of being engulfed by memories.
Exactly. And by using a metaphor like a wave of nostalgia, we're giving the emotion a physical presence. It allows the listener to feel the weight and intensity of the feeling.
This is also insightful. I'm starting to see sentences in a whole new light.
That's what I love about exploring language. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for connection and expression.
Okay, so we've covered happiness, anxiety, anger, sadness, and nostalgia. What other emotional terrain can we explore using these tools?
Well, there's a whole spectrum of human emotions, and each one presents a unique challenge when it comes to expression. But with practice and a willingness to experiment, we can find ways to articulate even the most complex feelings.
I'm ready to dive even deeper. What other fascinating emotions can we explore using the power of sentences? It feels like we've only just touched the surface of all that's possible with language.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so exciting.
Like we've opened a door to this whole new world of communication.
Exactly.
Right.
And the more we explore, those little nuances of language, the better we can connect with others and express the whole range of the human experience.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty heavy emotions like anxiety and sadness, but what about those lighter ones?
Yeah.
The more fleeting feelings? How do we capture those in a sentence?
That's a great question. Those subtle emotions can be just as powerful and deserve just as much care.
Right. I'm thinking of things like contentment or anticipation or even just a simple sense of wonder.
Those are perfect examples. Let's start with contentment. How about, she sat on the porch, swing a gentle breeze, rustling the leaves, feeling utterly at peace.
Oh, I love that it's so simple, but it evokes such a strong sense of tranquility.
We're using sensory details to create that calm and contentment. A gentle breeze, rustling leaves.
Yeah.
Those all contribute to the feeling of peace.
And utterly at peace really seals the deal. There's no doubt about how she's feeling.
Exactly. Sometimes just stating the emotion directly can be very effective, especially when you pair it with that vivid imagery.
Now, what about anticipation? How can we build that feeling of excitement and eagerness into a sentence?
Let's see. How about, he checked his watch every few seconds, his heart pounding with anticipation for the curtain to rise.
Oh, I can feel the excitement building. Just hearing that sentence, the action of checking his watch repeatedly really gives me that sense of impatient waiting.
And the phrase, his heart pounding, adds a physical element to the emotion.
Yeah.
Makes it more visceral for the listener.
It's like we're right there with him, feeling his anticipation build.
Exactly. And notice how the structure of the sentence itself contributes to that feeling of anticipation, that long, drawn-out sentence.
Yeah.
With that dependent clause at the beginning really mirrors the feeling of waiting for something.
That's so clever. I'm starting to see how every element of a sentence, from word choice to punctuation, can be used to enhance the emotional impact.
Absolutely. That's what makes writing such a powerful tool for communication.
Okay, so we've covered contentment and anticipation. What about that feeling of wonder, that sense of awe and amazement?
Ah, wonder. One of my favorites to capture in language. How about this? She gazed up at the star-filled sky, a sense of wonder washing over her as she contemplated the vastness of the universe.
Wow, that's beautiful. I can practically feel myself standing under that sky, feeling so small, yet connected to something much bigger.
Exactly. We're using imagery to evoke that feeling of awe and insignificance in the face of something so grand and mysterious.
Yeah, and the phrase, a sense of wonder washing over her, perfectly captures that feeling of being overwhelmed by the beauty and complexity of the universe.
Yeah, it's like the emotion itself is a physical force capable of washing over us and transforming us.
This has been so inspiring. I feel like I'm seeing the world with new eyes now, noticing the subtle emotions that color our everyday experiences.
That's the power of language. It allows us to not only express our emotions, but to deepen our understanding of them.
So as we wrap up our exploration of emotions in sentences, what's the one key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to remember that language is a tool, and like any tool can be used skillfully or clumsily.
That's such a great point. It's not enough to just know the words we have to know how to use them effectively to get our point across.
Exactly. So my advice to anyone listening is to pay attention to the language you use, both in your writing and in your everyday conversations.
Think about the emotions you want to convey.
Yeah.
Choose your words carefully and craft your sentences with intention and purpose.
The more you practice, the more natural it will become. And before you know it, you'll be wielding the power of language like a true master, expressing yourself with clarity, nuance, and emotional depth.
That's a wonderful thought to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
This has been an incredible journey into the heart of language.
And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and never underestimate the power of a well-crafted sentence.